This is the Wealth Junkie Show. Brought to you by CEO Capital Partners, Brendan Dukeman and Will Harvey. Your hosts deliver the daily fix you're looking for with exciting wealth-building secrets and strategies for what's working today. Listen to real-life stories straight from the mouths of some of the hottest, most successful entrepreneurs and financial freedom seekers to fuel your success addiction.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us for the Daily Wealth Junkies Show. My name is Brandon Dukeman here with Will Harvey, and we've got an awesome show in store for you today. But first, before we get started, be sure to subscribe to our show so that you don't miss any of our daily episodes, wherever you're listening to this show at. And join us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/wealthjunkies. And now I'm just going to turn it over to Will, and he can introduce our guest for the day.
Thanks so much, Brandon. Today we have Joel Hawbaker on the show. I hope I pronounced that correct. So Joel is a high school teacher currently. He's an author, speaker, and a blended family coach as well. And I'm looking forward to learning more about that. And Joel, without further ado, can you just give the listeners a little bit more about your background and just what got you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you guys for having me on. So for me, high school teaching is what I've done for most of my adult life. I have a degree in history, studied at Covenant College down in Georgia, and also was able to spend a semester at Oxford University in the UK, studying medieval civilizations. And, I love teaching high school history. It's been a blast. This is my 14th year in the classroom, but it's also something that I feel very privileged to do because, Brandon and I were talking before we got started recording, when you have a job that you enjoy, that's something that you would enjoy doing even if you weren't getting paid for it, like that's a really nice thing. At the same time, a couple of years ago, I realized that I wanted to be doing something even bigger than just being in a classroom. I wanted to have the opportunity to help more people. And so that's what got me into the other items that you mentioned in terms of speaking, writing, and then being a blended family coach. So my blended family story starts when I was in middle school. My parents split up. We live in a very, I'm from, and I live again in a very small town in Alabama, less than 25,000 people. And so everybody knows everybody. And so when my parents split up, like it wasn't a secret. It wasn't anything you could hide from. And about a year later, my mom started dating a man that I call my stepdad. Even though they never married, I still refer to him as my stepdad. And my parents had a better divorce than a lot of marriages I've seen. We lived with mom, but dad came and picked us up for school every day. They still got along really well. They never talked badly about each other. We would celebrate holidays together. So like Thanksgiving was me and my brother and sister, mom and dad, and mom's boyfriend and mom's boyfriend's dad, all sitting around the same Thanksgiving table.
You don't see that very often.
No, and that's the thing is I didn't know that. That's what's so amazing is I didn't realize that was weird till I got to college and I started, you talk with people your first couple, weeks on campus and you share notes and you go home for a break and you come back and you start talking about Thanksgiving and what are you going to do? And so I'd start sharing about, here's who's going to be at our Thanksgiving. And they just kind of looked at me, what? So your mom and your dad, they've been divorced for how many years and they still have Thanksgiving together and your mom's boyfriend is there too and that's fine. And I was like, yeah, is that not how it is for most?
That's right. One of the first times I've actually heard that being successful. So
yeah, exactly. And again, so I had no idea that was strange. And looking back on it, I'm really, really thankful for that amazing example that my parents and my stepdad set for me. Because I got married for the first time at 19 years old after my sophomore year of college. And she and I were married for 8.5 years. We had 2 kids together. And we divorced almost 10 years ago now. So she's been remarried for about 6 years. I've been remarried for about 5.5 years. And because of the example I saw from my parents, we've worked really hard to try to get along well also. Again, we all live in the same tiny Alabama town. We live 1.5 miles apart.
Oh, wow.
Our kids go to the same school they've always gone to, a school I used to teach at and the same school I graduated from. And so everybody knows everybody's business. And so it was really important to us to make sure that we created as positive an environment as we could for our 2 daughters. And thankfully, both the girls' stepdad and their stepmom, my wife, have also bought into that. They've been great because you can't do that if everybody's not bought in. You got to have everybody on the same page. And thankfully, we've got all four adults who work really hard to try to get along well together and to try to raise
acting like real adults.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly it. Is you'd think that would be common sense, but based on what all of us have experienced or seen with people around us, like we know that is not the case, unfortunately.
Definitely not.
And so that's a couple years ago. Like I said, I started thinking about how can I also help people outside of the classroom. And one of the big things that really kept coming up on my radar is other people who are in similar situations to mine, people who are struggling with post-divorce life, people who are struggling with anger and resentment from a failed relationship or marriage, and the kids that are suffering the consequences from that, because that's what I see a lot of in my classroom. Because what's going on at home absolutely affects what happens to people inside a classroom. And again, any young adults listening to that, I mean, when you were in high school or college, like what was happening outside of the classroom, it affected your performance inside the classroom. Or what happened at home definitely affected your performance on the job. And so part of my mission, part of my goal is to help other blended families learn how to live more cooperatively together. So blended families could be step families. It could be divorce and remarriage, or it could be death of a spouse and remarriage, or it could be adoptive or foster situations. So that's why I use the term blended family instead of just step family. So like my older brother is not divorced. He's still married to the same lady that he married my senior year in high school. They just actually coming up in 3 months, they'll be celebrating, I think, their 20th anniversary, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
They've got 2 biological kids, but they also have, at any given time, 1 to 3 kids that they are fostering temporarily.
Very cool.
Yeah, so they do some amazing things, but that's also a type of blended family, because when you bring in foster kids, it affects the dynamic with your biological kids. And a lot of people that haven't been through that don't necessarily understand how much of a toll that can also take on the biological family. And so again, my desire, part of my hope, is to help other families who are struggling with that, 1, by helping them realize they're not alone, and 2, by giving them some practical, very applicable tips that can be life-changing if you will put them into place. So again, about 1.5 years ago, I started doing this, and I've been very blessed. I've been able to speak at churches and conferences. I've spoken at high schools and colleges, and I'm really thankful to be able to bring this kind of message of encouragement to people. And so, a lot of your audience, as we were talking, you mentioned a lot of your listeners are going to be kind of young 20s or maybe early 20s, mid 20s kind of entrepreneurs. And they're thinking, well, this isn't me yet. Well, that's good. I hope it's not yet. But if it is, that's okay too. But here's the other part. And you guys know this. If you're mid 20s and you're not married yet, a lot of the people that you may be interested in dating, they're going to be single parents.
Yeah. It's very true. I run into that problem all the time.
And so what that means is it would be helpful for you to also be aware of what these things look like. One of my best friends, his son is out of college now, and his son's name is Josiah. Josiah is dating a young woman who has a 2-year-old from a previous marriage. And so he calls me about once a month. He's like, hey, this thing, what do I do? And I applaud him for that, because it means he's not just trying to wing it. He's a good man who wants to learn how to do this particular aspect of life well. And that's something I feel really privileged to be able to try to help him with. So that's the short version of my story. That's how I got to where I am. And I feel very blessed to be able to do this sort of thing and try to help people who need it.
That's really cool. What are when you were growing up and you were going through everything, and you said that it was obviously a less normal situation than most people that end up getting divorced and do all that. What were some people saying to you when did you realize that, hey, maybe this isn't the norm?
Yeah, late high school, early college. See, I graduated high school in 2000, and so the divorce rates were still a little bit lower then. And I only knew a handful of other people whose parents were divorced. Most of my friends, their parents were still together. And so I didn't really have a lot of other situations to compare it to. I knew I had one guy that I graduated high school with whose parents had split up, and his dad lived in an apartment and his mom still lived in the house they had been in together. But they got along okay. They both showed up at our soccer games and baseball and basketball games. And so I thought it was pretty normal for parents to be able to be in the same room and celebrate their kids' accomplishments together. Again, tiny town Alabama is probably not a good microcosm of the
Right.
world at large. But when that's all you've known, you think that it is.
Right.
And so it was after I went to college when I started meeting people from all over the world. And when I was able to travel the world a little bit myself, I spent 3 weeks in Honduras on a mission trip after my freshman year. I spent a semester of my sophomore year, like I said, in the UK at Oxford. And it was when I started really getting outside of this little tiny bubble that I realized our situation, it's probably not usual. And it made me even more thankful for what my parents had done to set that sort of example for me. And so, again, it really already started planting seeds in my brain of, okay, well, how do we make this more the norm?
I think it needs to be more the norm. I mean, every night I go to work and I'm dealing with people who can't even exchange custody of a kid without getting into a fight. And it's just to hear that, I didn't even know that was a normal thing. To be your story, to be honest, I mean, I don't see it. You know, like you said, small town thing might not be the micro part of it, but
right.
yeah, that's impressive, and it's great to hear that there can be people that can actually handle their business without.
Yeah. Well, and I would, I'd love to set myself up as a paragon of virtue and say, well, it's just because I'm really awesome, and that has nothing to do with it actually, because I've made most of the mistakes that a person can make in terms of relationships. I give a whole lot of credit to my parents for setting a good example. My mom, my dad, and my stepdad were all retired military. And so a large part of how they function was just mutual respect. And that's something that I think is severely lacking in any area of adult life today. Anytime we disagree with people, we tend to go for the ad hominem attacks. We tend to attack the person rather than the issue. And as a result of that, it seems like a large degree of civility has broken down. And unfortunately, that also plays itself out in the personal relationship. So, and I'm sure on your job, I'm sure you see the ugly side of it a lot more than most people do. And so it maybe gives you an outsized view of just how bad things are. Whereas just like for me, I had an outsized view of how good things could be.
Right.
Because I only ever saw it really done pretty well. And I'm thankful to now be able to show people, no, this right here, this is an option. It's a possibility. But, and this is the part people don't like to hear, it's going to take work and sacrifice on your part. It's gonna take you being willing to be disrespected or be getting the short end of the stick sometimes. You are going to have to be willing to give up something in order to get something better in the long run. And that's the part that people don't like. In fact, it's funny, I was speaking at a local Kiwanis club recently, like a local civic group. And I shared my,
good group.
It is, yeah, they do a lot of great work. Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, Lion clubs, like they do a lot of great work in the communities, especially the high school sponsorships of key clubs and things like that Kiwanis does. So I was speaking at one of those recently, and I got done sharing kind of my blended family story and how I help with blended families and how it takes a lot of work and takes a lot of sacrifice. And one of the ladies, she raised her hand, one of the ladies who was there, she's probably mid-50s. She said, so I've got a daughter who's divorced, and I have a question. I said, okay, shoot. She said, well, when you go to different places and you share this kind of information, how do you avoid getting punched in the face?
That's a great question.
It's a really good question. So I referenced Muhammad Ali, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. That's a little, and I said, no, seriously, the thing is you have to start with empathy. And I think it helps that I am also divorced and remarried because I'm not someone coming into the situation from a place of judgment. Right. I'm not coming in and going, well, maybe if you had just been a better spouse, you would, oh no, that'll get you punched in the face and you might deserve it. Yeah. What absolutely. I do. Yeah. So no, I'm able to come in, I'm able to say, listen, I understand that you're hurting. I've been through a divorce. It was not pleasant. I went through a divorce in a tiny town where everybody knows everybody. Trust me, it was not, I get it. Yeah. At the same time, what we need to do is figure out what's best for your children and you in the long run. And what's best in the long run is sometimes to overlook the little offenses so that you can work towards a better goal in the big picture. And that's not something that's really pleasant to hear, but when people know that you understand their hurt first, that helps them be willing to listen to you. It's, something you get, I'm sure you guys have heard of and probably even read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen.
Yep. Sitting on the bookshelf.
Exactly. So one of the major things in there is he says, seek first to understand, then to be understood. So if I come into any new blended family situation trying to understand their hurt first, then once I understand where they're coming from, they're a lot more likely to listen to what I have to say in response, instead of just immediately coming in and going, well, you're wrong, you need to do this, and you're wrong, you need to do that. Like, I understand why people would want to punch me in the face for that. I'd want to punch me in the face for that too.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. So when did you realize that this is something that you could potentially turn into a business and just start coaching and just bringing on clients and all of that?
It was probably a couple of years ago. I actually started getting into professional speaking. That was my first kind of entrepreneurial venture. How about if you had told me when I was in early mid-20s that I would one day be an entrepreneur, I'd have thought you had completely lost your mind. I'm a very...
Why is that?
Well, it's just because I like the security of knowing where my paycheck is coming from, and I like the somewhat false sense of security of having a job. I say somewhat false because you can always be fired, right?
Absolutely.
That's a great. I like that right there, because people talk about how they want that steady paycheck.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they're always talking about job security and just making sure and it's like this paranoia that they have to keep their job. So that's a great point right there. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too, because like you mentioned in the lead up to the show, a lot of people want to keep a job. It's not even the job they want, but they don't want to lose it either.
Right.
And it's like,
got the paycheck, it pays for their weekends and
that's
things
right.
like that.
Yeah. And so, and that's absolutely been me my whole adult life, even though most of my teaching has been in private schools where you don't have tenure. A lot of the time, I enjoy having a paycheck. But a couple years ago, again, I started thinking, one, how can I help other people? But two, is this something that I could do that could also become financially viable? And so I got into professional speaking, and for most of my first year of doing that, I actually spoke mostly on leadership. That's something that I've studied. It's something I've exercised a lot of in a wide variety of roles. But I also realized that I don't have an immediate name recognition factor. I don't have an immediate hook. I wasn't an Olympian. I didn't climb Mount Everest. I haven't survived cancer. You know what I mean?
Right. Those
kind of things where when you think of like leadership speakers or motivational speakers, it's these people who have some incredible, awesome story of overcoming something. And it's like, I went through divorce and bankruptcy and foreclosure, but most of that was my own fault. So I don't think that sort of counts as the story people are looking for. I think the biggest thing I've had to overcome is the fact, you guys can't tell this because we're sitting down. The biggest thing I've had to overcome is the fact that I'm 5'3" tall. Like, that's my biggest issue to deal with, is the Napoleon jokes that I hear in my history class,
Yeah, I'm sure you get that a lot.
Oh yeah. And the children regret it when they get their essay test back.
Oh yeah.
Should have made that joke to me.
That's exactly right. -14. Why Napoleon? That's why. No, but I started looking into what it's like to be a professional speaker and what it's like to be a not necessarily a life coach, but that type of situation where how can I help people who have very specific problems find very specific, tailored to their situation solutions? And the more I looked into it, the more I thought, oh my goodness, there are literally millions of Americans who need the kind of information that I'm sharing regarding blended families. I just looked up some statistics the other day. I think as of last year, the statistic is that every single day in America, there are 2,000 new blended families that are formed.
Wow.
Yeah, let that sink in. 2,000 new blended families every day.
Well, you'll be in business forever.
Well, I hope so. And part of that is because a lot of times the divorce rates for second marriages are even higher than first marriages. So sometimes you get people who are on marriage number 3 marrying someone who's on marriage number 2, or someone on marriage number 4 going with someone on marriage number 1. And so each one carries with it its own different dynamics. And so I've met some really incredible people. There are I wouldn't say lots. There are a number of other people who are doing things similarly to the way that I am in terms of helping blended families, but all of their stories are unique and different. And so they approach it slightly differently than I do. And I think that's really great too, because I've been able to learn from them. Here's what works for them. Here's what doesn't. And I can look at that and adapt it to my own situation. Say, okay, great. That's really good. I like how you did that. I can't do this part because, my story is a little bit different. So for example, there's one family in this town that we live in that I've been able to chat with, and they gave me some great information. the mom and dad that are married now, the dad was married before, the mom was married before. Each of them have 2 or 3 kids from their first marriage. The mom's first husband passed away. The dad's first wife, they divorced, right? So they're married now, and they also have 2 or 3 kids of their own. So there's his kids, her kids, their kids, all living in the same house.
Wow, that's a lot of kids.
It's like 7 or 8. And the age range is 15 to a year and a half.
Oh, wow.
And boys and girls, some are his, some are hers, some are theirs, and it's complicated. And it was really great to, I chatted with, so the way I met them is the oldest kid, the oldest daughter, is friends with my daughter. They lifeguarded together at a swimming pool this summer. And so I met the parents there because we go to the same pool, and we talked with them a lot, and our kids got along. And, it was just interesting to listen to their family dynamics and go, oh, wow, yeah, okay, there are lots of other people out there like this who also could use some help. And they actually ended up helping me by providing me with some access to resources and information that I hadn't read before. And it was a really big help. And, it's just that kind of community where when people realize that you're there to help, you're not trying to just make a buck off of them.
Right.
That actually goes a long way. And so that's something that I've really also enjoyed doing, is being able to do a lot of this to begin with. Just do it pro bono. I want to help people. If I make money eventually, that's great. But really what I want to do is I want to help people and let the rest sort itself out. One of the things, so I self-published a book on leadership a couple years ago. And one of the quotes that I put in there is that it's more important, I believe, to focus on relationships than it is to focus on results. Because if I focus on relationships, the results will take care of themselves.
100%.
Right. So as a soccer coach, if I focus on having good relationships with my kids, and if my players have good relationships with each other, I know that they will work hard for each other. And if they do what I tell them and we work hard, I don't have to worry about the win-loss column. It'll take care of itself. We'll be just fine. Same thing in blended families. If we focus on getting the relationships right, then long term, we'll be just fine. We'll hit some bumps on the road. We'll have some ups and downs, but it will be generally an uptrend. And that's what we're hoping for.
That's cool.
So being from a small town, and you said everybody knows everybody, I'm sure not everybody was positive towards you in your relationship status and the separation process. What were some of the things, positive and negative, that you got from people in the town?
Well, that's a really good question because I don't want to say anything bad about anybody because there are people in this town that listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
No, the truth is, when you go through a hard situation, and again, people in there, people you guys' age know this. When you go through a hard situation, you find out who your friends are. Because people take sides. And I don't say that as a knock against people who didn't choose my side. But the truth of the matter is, when you go through a breakup, whether it's a divorce breakup or a dating breakup, people naturally tend to go towards one group or the other. It's very rare for people to be able to remain friends with both parties. Now, in small town Alabama, you sort of have to find a way to do that, and it may take a little bit of time. So that was one of the hard things to go through, is people that I've been friends with for most of my life all of a sudden weren't talking to me anymore, or they weren't talking to me in the same way that they had. Now, a year, 2 years later, it was okay. But during the midst of the divorce, it got a little rocky, and that's okay. I actually, so my ex-wife and I actually separated for 6 months before we divorced. And the week after we separated, I went to a church dinner on a Wednesday night. And one of the guys I was at church with asked me, he said, so what are you doing here? I said, it's Wednesday. We have church dinner. Like, I'm hungry and wanted to come hang out and do church stuff. And the guy said, yeah, but you just separated from your wife. I said, yeah. He said, well, most people would be home keeping their head low. It's, again, small town Alabama. Like, everybody knows everybody. This is big news right now. I said, I understand that. But if I can't go to church and be welcome, where can I go?
Right.
Like, that ought to be where I'm most welcome. And he went, no, I mean, you're exactly right. We're glad you're here. I'm just surprised. I said, no, I get
Got
that.
it.
But I thought the same thing. I thought, oh, is he saying I shouldn't be here? And he said, no,
Right.
I'm glad you're here. I'm just surprised because most people wouldn't be. And so that was one of the good things, was that I did have some good friends who helped me out. My church family was amazing to me. My pastor and some of the other people in the church were very helpful to me, even in the middle of hard times. And what I'm also thankful for is that my church was also helpful to my ex-wife and my kids. My church didn't pick sides. They did what church is supposed to do, and they helped everybody. And again, I think that's also unusual. At least it's not the stories that you normally hear. And so that was a good thing. Again, it was hard to see people pick sides, but it was positive to see people who were willing to help everybody in the situation. One of my good friends that I'd played sports with for most of my life, he actually he and I had lunch one day, and he said, "Listen, I'm not here to take your side or your ex-wife's side. I'm here to make sure your kids are okay." And I thought, you know what? I really appreciate that. Thank you, because that's the thing that is the hardest. Because when adults go through a divorce, it's not pleasant for the adult. It's always harder on the kids,
Right.
Because they don't understand, and that's what a lot of blended families need help with. Is you have to learn how to set your own feelings aside, at least temporarily, in order to do what's best for your children.
So is that one of your focuses for your business? That
Absolutely.
To get in contact with the kids and address the issues that the kids are facing?
Not necessarily for me to get in contact with the kids, but to help the adults understand that what they're doing might need to be changed in order to help their kids.
Okay.
Because I've been a high school teacher. I've taught every grade 5 through 12, but I don't consider myself in the position to where I need to be doing counseling with young kids. Like, that's not my role. What I want to do is help the parents parent their kids better. And again, not because I'm the world's greatest parent, but because I've learned, and I've also seen some of the things that I've done poorly, and I want to help other people avoid doing that. So that's what I want to do is just help. If I can help other people avoid the same mistakes I made, that's a big win.
Yeah, basically teach them how to fish as opposed to giving them a fish. That type of
absolutely, that kind of analogy. That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what's your vision, your goals moving forward with the business and all of that?
So my goal is that I really I love to teach. I love being in the classroom. I also love to speak, and I love to help people through coaching. And so my goal is over the next few years to continue to grow my speaking and my coaching, so that I can help more people, whether that's continuing to do that during the school year, or where I do a lot of my speaking over the summer or school breaks or whatever it may be. But I love the idea of making this a bigger and bigger part of my world, because it's something that I can help people with. I'm also in the midst of writing another book. I'm hoping to have that done probably early next year. This one is about blended family life. And the goal for that is to be able to help people who maybe can't come to the events where I'm speaking. So if you can't make it, great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's a book, and you can read through it. You can read through it with your spouse. It's got practical tips. It's got questions. It's got, suggestions. It's got all sorts of ways that you can read a chapter, change your world tomorrow. Read another chapter, change your world a little bit more tomorrow. Because it's the same analogy here playing sports growing up. If you get this much better, you can't see I'm making a little, if you get 1 inch better every day over the course of a whole season, by the end of the season, you've really improved your team a lot.
Yeah,
same thing with a family.
So true.
If you can improve your family just a little bit every single week, imagine where you could be in a year from right now. Like, if you're in a really awful blended family situation, I'm really sorry, but guess what? The good news is it doesn't have to stay that way.
Yeah.
A year from now, it could be really, really different, but it's going to take tiny incremental steps.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of my goal, is to be able to help the most people that I can, whether it's through speaking, through coaching, or through writing. And I'm really excited about the doors that are opening for that.
That's awesome.
It sounds like there's a lot of doors that are closed right now, not willing to accept that help. But I think if you got the opportunity to open a lot of doors and show people what you can do for them.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. That's actually something I have found to be true, both through experience and through talking with other blended family speakers, is that as a group, blended families are some of the most unlikely to seek the help they need voluntarily. It's kind of like people who really know they need to lose weight but just don't want to. Because I've been that guy too. Like, currently I weigh just under 150. When I went through my divorce, I got up to about 195 pounds.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah, unhealthily heavy. And it took me about a year and a half before I realized how badly I needed to lose weight. And what it took was finding an accountability partner that I'm actually now married to help me lose all that weight. And it's the same kind of thing with blended families, is they know they need help, but they don't want to admit it because it's a little bit of a pride thing.
Absolutely.
And it's also a situation where, especially again in small towns, people don't want to admit that they had to get help from somebody else because that word about that might get out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that may mean that I do a lot of my work outside of Anniston where I live. I may, and I'd love to travel. I've got a couple events that I'm looking at in places as far away as California, or Canada or New Orleans, and I'd love to go and help families in those places as well. So I'm excited about the doors that are opening, the possibilities that are coming our way.
That's really cool.
That's awesome. So, Joel, we're going to hop right into our Moments of Truth section. It's the same 7 questions that we ask everybody, and I'm going to get it started with the first one here. Who is your success role model?
My success role model, it had to be my parents. My dad was a 20-year Army veteran, won 3 Bronze Stars in Vietnam, 82nd Airborne, Army Ranger. Like, he was pretty good soldier. He wasn't always the greatest dad, especially if you ask my older brother. They didn't get along for a lot of his life, but they also reconciled before Dad passed away, which I'm eternally grateful for. But he and my mom was also 10 years in the reserve. She's been a nurse for most of her life. And so they are my kind of success examples because they spent their entire lives in service of other people.
That's really cool. Yeah. What's your biggest success?
Ironically, I would say my biggest success is my family. I know I'm divorced and remarried, but I'm very thankful to be remarried. I've got 2 amazing daughters. They are kind-hearted. They are healthy. They're intelligent. They're very accomplished for their young ages. They're 15 and 12. And I tell people all the time that my kids are far better children than I deserve to have. So I'm really proud of that.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it plays into your success for business-wise too, because it gives you the experience to be in business.
Yeah.
So I think that's great. What's a typical day for you look like?
So a typical day starts about 5:15. I get up and I go for about a 2-mile run with my dogs. I've got 2 60-pound rescue dogs sitting here in the room with me,
Nice.
a bulldog mix and a pit bull mix. So we'll go run a couple miles, come home, shower, eat some breakfast. I leave for school about 6:30, teach all day, and then come home in the afternoon. I might have soccer practice. If I don't have soccer practice, I may be doing a podcast interview or sending out proposals for speaker events. Maybe talking on the phone with, again, a blended family situation, trying to help somebody out. And then, spending time with my wife and kids. My kids go back and forth each week. So on the weeks we have the kids, we spend more time with them, obviously, when they're here. When they're at their mom's house, my wife and I spend more time together, just the 2 of us. I try to read every day, at least some. I love reading the works of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, especially. I love reading books by Tom Clancy. I love spy novels, goofy stuff like that. So every day includes at least a little bit of reading. Typically after my run, I'll read a chapter or 2 of the Bible before I take off for school, because that's how I get myself ready for the day. So yeah, it's pretty busy. I normally go to bed about 10 o'clock and there's not a lot of downtime in between. So, but it's a good day.
That's good stuff. What's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is actually from, there's 2. One from J.R.R. Tolkien from The Lord of the Rings, where he says, "All that we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." Right? That's our whole life. Well, that's the biggest thing we have to decide, is just what are we going to do with our time. The other one is actually from Bono, the lead singer from U2, in a song called Grace from the All That You Can't Leave Behind album. He says, "Grace makes beauty out of ugly things." And that quote has been that's been life-changing for me, because I understand what it's like to be one of those ugly things and experience grace.
Yeah, those are both really good quotes. Yeah, absolutely.
So I know you mentioned a few of them, but what are some of your hobbies?
Sports. I love, I grew up playing soccer and baseball, picked up basketball in high school. And so I love watching sports. I watch soccer as much as I can. I've been coaching soccer now for 17 years, I guess. I like reading about history. Recently I've developed a love for Mario Kart Wii, which is a lot of fun.
It's a great game. Very
competitive. My 12-year-old
Nintendo guy.
Yeah. So the thing is, I never got past the 8-bit Nintendo. Like, I never got beyond regular Mario Brothers. And then
you never got to the 64?
No, I couldn't. There were too many buttons for me. Even in college, like the GameCube, the N64, all that, it was too complicated. The Wii I like because it's just a steering wheel. Like, I can handle that. But that's the only game I play. So my 12-year-old and I actually played some Mario Kart. We normally have to play on the team race, because otherwise we get mad at each other, hitting each other with shells and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Very competitive game.
Yeah. Well, and with the Napoleon complex, like, competitive doesn't necessarily mean good times in our house. So
I'll bet. What's the best business book that you've read? You said you read a lot of books.
Yeah, I would say the best business book I've read is probably The Go-Giver by Bob Burg and John David Mann. I just came across that one a couple years ago. I've actually met Bob Berg some online. We've had some communications. He was kind enough to read one of my very early blog posts and retweet it to some people, which was very generous of him because, I'm a nobody from nowhere, and he's written half a dozen best-selling books. But if you haven't read that one, I strongly recommend it because it's not a how-to book. It's a story. It's a novel, basically, but it's got business principles in it. And there's a whole series of them based on that same one. Like I said, it's called The Go-Giver, and it's really, really good.
Awesome.
Yeah, I might have to check that one out. My reading list keeps getting bigger and bigger.
I'm sure. Yeah, same. I saw a great quote yesterday. Someone said, "I've come to the conclusion that buying books and reading books are entirely unrelated hobbies."
Yes, exactly.
So true.
I thought that's really good. That's my life right there.
So, Joel, last question here. If there's one key piece of advice you could leave our listeners with about achieving success, what do you think it would be?
It would be to go out of your way to help other people, even if you don't think there's anything in it for you. If you're more interested in helping people than you are making money off of people, in the long run, that will pay off because people will realize that you are the kind of person who they also want to help. And again, I think if you read that book, The Go-Giver by Bob Berg, that's one of the key principles in it is that it's all about helping other people. Maybe it's about connecting them with someone who can help them better than you can. But the key is if you will go out of your way to help other people, that will pay off in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
If you give it'll return eventually.
Yeah. Whether you call that the reciprocity or karma, however you want to refer to it, like if you're helping other people, that's a good thing and it will come back to you eventually.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So Joel, how can our listeners get in touch with you if they got questions about their blended family? Because I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that are listening that can relate extremely well to your story and what you do. How can they get in contact with you?
So the easiest way is come by my website. It's reallifeleading.com. Reallifeleading.com. You can find me on LinkedIn under my name, Joel Hawbaker. You can find me on Facebook, either under my name or under facebook.com/reallifeleading. You can find me on Twitter. It's @reallifeleading. At any of those places, I'm happy to connect. I'm always glad to answer whatever questions people have, and look forward to hopefully being able to connect with and help out some of your listeners.
Yeah. And what's the title of the book that you have published and the one that's coming out? The
title of the book I published is called Inverted Leadership. Actually, I was looking for a copy of it on my shelf over there. So it's called Inverted Leadership. You can find it. There's a link to it on my website. It's also on Amazon. Also self-published an ebook a couple years before that called Extraordinary Leadership, 10 Things Dad Taught Me Without Having to Say Anything. And I haven't actually titled the new one yet, so I'm afraid I can't give that one out. But I'm looking forward to getting that one finished, and I'll be sure to let you know when I do.
Yeah, we'll be looking for it.
Beautiful.
So, well, Joel, we appreciate you being on the show today. I think you provided a lot of value and a great story that I think there's a lot of people out there that can connect with. And for our listeners, don't forget, subscribe to the show so that you don't miss any of the daily interviews that we are doing. And also join us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/wealthjunkies. Again, Joel, we appreciate you being on here today.
Hey, thank you guys. I had a great time and enjoy the work that you're doing. Keep it up.
Awesome. Thanks.
Everybody.
Joel. We'll see you guys.
You've been listening to the Daily Wealth Junkie Show, brought to you by CEO Capital Partners. CEO Capital Partners works with business owners and executives to build passive income through multifamily apartment syndications. For more information about how you can invest in quality multifamily real estate assets and build significant streams of passive income, visit us today at ceocapitalpartners.com.